Our next presenter is David Sereda, okay? And honestly, guys, I think David is perhaps the only one that is powerful enough to follow Jaime. Yeah, and brave enough, we'll say that too. Look, I had sort of an idea of what I wanted to say about David for this introduction, but I've kind of changed it up. I have something to tell you here that, well, it's just one more small amazing thing in an entire week of amazing things within an entire lifetime of amazing things, but nonetheless, it's amazing. When David got here a couple of days ago, we talked a little bit about, you know, his presentation and what he was going to say, and he showed me a few of the new things that we had been talking about over the weeks and months prior to the conference. And then he said, oh, and by the way, I have something a little bit new. He said, I think I know what caused the quake in Haiti. Oh, really? So he commences to show me. And he said, by the way, look at what is going on right now as we speak. And I looked. Oh my, what he showed me. And he said, look, when this snaps back, now he's going to give you the details on this, but just to the point I'm trying to drive home, he says, when this snaps back, we're going to have a mega, not just a big quake, a mega quake, a really big quake. He said, 2 to 3 days after, he says, I'm still working on the timeline, but you see right now it's pointed right at us. And he goes to the next hour's update, and oh my God, it snapped. Right as the moment we're talking about it, he says, oh my gosh, it's going to happen while we're here. It's going to happen while we're here. I kept bouncing over to him, and he kept updating me and showing me what was going on currently. And he said, well, he said, I think it's going to be probably in the next 24 to 36 hours now. 8.8 chilly. About what, 1:30 last night. He told me it was going to happen. He predicted it, you might say. This is all real, guys. I'm going to give you a prediction right now. This young man we're about to hear from, this guy is a rising star in our field and for the whole field of the humanity, for, you know, human race, man. This guy is the next Hoagland, okay? He is the heir apparent. You heard it here. He's going to surpass him. He's on this trajectory right now. Ladies and gentlemen, David Sereda.
Members of the UFO Congress, the House and the Senate, the Speaker of the House, Bob Brown. It's an honor to be last. I mean, this is the end of Bob Brown's, 20-some-odd-year journey here, and it's really great to be in this position. And a lot has happened in the last few days, so there's been a few surprises kind of thrown at us, and Bob kind of gave you a little bit of a teaser of something that I've been working on for a long time, and I'm just going to talk about this very briefly before I go into my full presentation on reverse-engineered UFO technology. I've been following the sun like people follow the stock market. And I look at the sun every day. And in fact, as we're approaching 2012, those of you may have heard me on Coast to Coast AM with George Norrie talking about quantum electrodynamics in 2012, over here on my right and left. And I'm just going to show you what has happened in the last, year is the sun went into the deepest solar minimum we've ever seen. And I had many dialogues with David Hathaway at NASA Solar Observatory. And I said to him, aren't we going to have a really cold winter this winter because the sun is so cold? and the amount of solar energy converted into thermodynamic energy is much lower. And he said, well, we can't really predict the weather yet. And of course, everybody knows we had a very cold winter. We had a lot of snow in places we've never seen it, like Texas and the southern United States. And so I noticed what happened, for 10 months there were no sunspots on the sun at all, nothing. And all of a sudden they started showing up. And last September, if you look at the image on the left, is the sun on the September 28th. And I had had a dream just before this actually happened that there were going to be over 100 earthquakes, just off the coast of Australia. And I, didn't know what to think of the dream. But anyway, days later, literally days later, on the 28th of September, this sunspot on the lower portion of the sun, and the sun is spinning counterclockwise, which actually to you is this way. And what's happening is the sunspots about every 20 days or so line up with Earth, and then they disappear and go back on the other side. And there were none for months. It's like the stock market. You're looking at the sun and nothing's happening. And this sunspot was in alignment with Earth, and boom, we had a tsunami in American Samoa. Very little sunspot activity for months. On January 12th, the day of the Haitian earthquake, you see on the second image on the right, big sunspot on the top, produced a little bit of X-ray class flaring at the medium level. Boom, we had an earthquake. And so what I was showing Bob was something really, really rare, according to NASA, very, very, very rare. And that is what's called a hitter flare erupted on the sun, which looks like a long kind of piece of spaghetti hanging out of the sun. It was 1 million kilometers long. And it was actually on space weather. And it was just kind of dangling there for 3 or 4 days as attached to a sunspot, like an umbilical cord. And when the sunspot was facing Earth, I knew that this thing was going to break. I mean, like a piece of spaghetti, it was going to break and then smash into the sun, and you would get an effect. And it did it right when it was facing Earth 2 days ago. And that's when I said to Bob, watch out. There is going to be a big earthquake. And everybody knows what happens. But basically, as we move into 2012, our solar system is moving into higher and higher frequencies in the galaxy. And like we've never seen in millions and millions of years, we're entering a very new dimension of our galaxy. And the energies that we're entering in field spaces move their energy into the sun and then consequently hiccup them and move them into the Earth. So we are going to see some very, very interesting changes. But that's not what my lecture is about here. How many of you would like to see, I mean, I'm sure I'm going to get a show of hands, Congress create a bill that gives us access to Lockheed Martin, Boeing, NASA, on the deepest levels to bring out reverse-engineered UFO technology so that we can all benefit from it and get off of fossil fuels? How many? So if this was really the United States Congress, well, it would happen. And really you are, because you are the people. You can vote and fight with your senators and your congressmen and demand that this happens, because we all know we're not crazy. Thousands or hundreds of thousands of sightings of UFOs are happening over the past couple of decades, and we're not all hallucinating. And after attending the UFO Congress, which is kind of like going through university, you've seen the evidence, you know it's real. And last year I presented a new hypothesis on my discovery on quantum electrodynamics and differentials as the answer to tapping into the zero-point energy fields. And at the end of my presentation, I showed one of my blueprints, my precious blueprints that I've held secret for over 10 years. And I never wanted to show all of them publicly because I was hoping to find an investor or a company that wanted to join me and secretly build this flying saucer like the Wright brothers and see if it flew. And I told you how at the age of 7 in Berkeley, California in 1968, I saw a flying saucer as clear as the Billy Meyer photographs reveal, as clear as that, with my own eyes. And that's how this whole thing started. And they started teaching me about the counter-rotational spinning fields as part of the answer to their propulsion systems. Well, I have never given up since, and I've gotten meetings at Boeing and at Lockheed Martin and NASA. I've been able to dialogue with a lot of their top scientists. So what I'm going to show you today, firstly, is a little bit of history. How many of you came to my lecture last year, just for a show of hands? So, yeah, not all of you, but a lot of you. So, I'm going to kind of fill in a little bit of the highlights of the old presentation and move into the future, because I have a lot of information to cover here. So the first thing is, we know from hearing Boyd Bushman's testimony that, according to Boyd Bushman, a friend of his who was a high-ranking Navy medical doctor, he had treated a young pilot who had just shot down the Roswell flying saucer with a classified beam weapon, super weapon, which I identified as the Tesla death ray. I found in FBI FOIA files I showed last year that it was very clear that the Tesla death ray, according to Tesla, could melt an aircraft engine from 200 plus miles away. There's no laser, there's no beam, you can't see anything. And that it was development was 1943, so there was plenty of time for the weapon to be operative by 1947. Can we play video clip number 1 coming up with Boyd Bushman, please? And Boyd here, he's going to tell you the same story, but there's some interesting layers to it. I just want to open with this, and because he says some different things. I went to refilm him, a new interview.
Informed me very well that he had a friend of his that was a pilot, and they had sighted one of those things on the radar, and they requested that he take the fastest airplane that we had at the time in 1947, and a propeller job, and to take it out and fly and see what he saw. And he, being one of our ace pilots, went out and saw it, and it was simply going back and forth in front of him. And therefore he called back and he said, "Well, guys," and he said, "yeah, we see you, and we see it. Do you see it?" He said, that isn't important. Tell me, are there any airlines around, or is there anyone flying a Piper Cub? Is there anyone else around that is like a friendly? And they said, no. And he said, I therefore request to shoot it down. And they said, why? He says, because it's beginning to take off and leave me, and I have the fastest airplane produced by the United States of America, and no one else is better than we are, and therefore I want to shoot it down. It has to be an enemy, because you have already told me there are no other friendlies. And therefore they said, well, you have one of the latest weapons that we have at the time. Head right on, and you're granted. And so he shot it. It came down. It came down and it lit close to where there was a road. Being a pilot, he went on ahead and landed. And at that time there was a hatch or a door that was open, and one of the little guys, around 4 feet high, Ty, was out walking kind of away from the craft, and rather than going toward him, he walked toward the craft. As he walked up it, he saw that it looked silvery, like aluminum or silver, but when he stuck his head inside, he was rather surprised that he could see out, as though there were no metal at all, as though everything was a window. And he did so. Then he looked around and saw the 3 other guys that were dead because he had shot them, and he knew that the military knew where he was, and therefore he hurriedly went out and got in his airplane and took off so that they wouldn't know that he knew what happened. And he didn't have any difficulty talking to my friend, the military medical professional, and I talked to him just last week, and I said, is your story still the same? He said, yeah, it sure is. Mike.
That's the end of that piece of footage. Now, where would we imagine? I mean, the story is classic. Everybody has different theories about where the craft ended up from Roswell. Boyd told me that the alien bodies were originally taken to Los Alamos National Lab, which began in 1943 as well. So a very, very feasible story, and the most likely place because it's right there in New Mexico. But we obviously started reverse engineering the technology itself. And his testimony, clearly states that this weapon, this classified beam weapon, if we were looking in the cockpit of the plane here, shot the UFO down, and we can't even imagine a beam weapon in 1947 because we can't even see any evidence of anybody using beam weapons today. I could tell you a lot of stories about that. He testified that there were 4 aliens, and one of them actually survived. And now let me tell you a little bit about Boyd Bushman, what you probably don't know. He's the inventor of the Stinger missile, which later became known as Red Eye. He built the first, for General Dynamics, infrared sensitive heat-seeking missiles. So a lot of his background is not just in aviation and propulsion systems, but actually in the destructive power of weapons themselves. And I've got a lot of tape of him talking about this, and literally it's almost kind of sinister that he talks about how many planes his weapons have shot down. He now has missiles that can pull over 80 Gs on a turn. 80 Gs, 80 times the force of gravity, using gravity cancelers and reverse engineered technology. But Boyd then went on to tell me about where the Tesla death ray is at today. In fact, it is him who did the work on it. And because he showed me some things that I don't want anybody to see, I'm just going to play you the audio, which is very, very stunning to hear. If we can get audio on the output here.
Not only that, but this same beam was aimed toward 2 automobiles.
Now, Boyd is going to start here talking about tests he did with the beam weapon in its current state. You can imagine in 1947 if we shot down a flying saucer with it. And we know all of the incident reports, even in the past couple of years, of mysterious fireballs coming down and hitting the ground and not making a sound. And the fact that UFOs don't come very close to our cities and our towns in the United States like they do in Mexico. And the real reason I believe is because they know, the ETs know, we have this weapon. And Boyd actually has a patent for this weapon at Lockheed Martin, which you can see on the U.S. patent website, but I'm not going to tell you the number of the patent. But here, he's describing some tests that he did with it. Utterly, utterly alarming at the power. And there's no laser, there's no tracer, there's no smoke, there's no green shining light. It's an invisible type of weapon. And I ask you to consider when you're hearing this, just recently, Tesla Motors, how many people know Tesla Motors electric car company? Not very many. They just got $500 million from Congress to develop their electric cars further. Probably the nicest electric cars coming into the market. Their 3 top engineers were flying in Palo Alto, California just before the IRS suicide bomber. And their plane crashed and they all died. And I believe this weapon was used on them.
Not only that, but this same beam was aimed toward 2 automobiles, and major critical parts of their electronics burned, and was aimed toward an airplane, and the critical parts of its electronics burned.
You mean airplane in flight or on the ground?
Well, this was I don't believe it. I told you it was dangerous. I always knew that I could put this little device in my briefcase and I could walk past my F-16s, fight the best, anyhow, and it would degauss the entire computer.
The brain.
Yeah, and all of a sudden they wouldn't know where to fly or nothing. And I just simply would walk past. I knew that. So I stopped that development.
Right.
Well, he went on ahead and with nothing more than making it a pulse device, verified that I was right. And it's kind of like the inverse neutron bomb. The neutron bomb all of a sudden goes off and all humans ever place die. But the cars and everything else is, they're operating perfectly well. Right, no, the neutron bomb. Neutron bomb, right.
Oh, that's the one that does
yeah, that's right.
Neutron bomb.
Neutron bomb, right.
Oh, that's the one that does
yeah, that's right. The
neutron radiation.
At any rate, this causes the cars and everything else to stop, but humans operate perfectly well. It's the inverse. But unfortunately, I knew that as this develops, I can basically cross any frontier I want And they can't send helicopters after me, airplanes after me, tanks after me. I can make them all stop at quite a decent distance.
Oh my God, that's amazing.
You're right.
He's saying, actually off camera, he said, if you were being chased by military tanks and helicopters, this device is very simple. I don't personally know how to build it, but it's highly, highly classified as a weapon because it's apparently very simple to make. It's dangerously simple. And if you pointed at a tank, an airplane, they would just all melt and fall out of the sky. So we know we have this weapon. It's probably our greatest secret in the arsenal of our military. And so when you see these stories of fireballs coming out of the sky, in fact, this happened to me. I was filming my new film, Quantum Communication, in Sedona, Arizona, and Cloud Swanson had just arrived from MIT. He's an MIT physicist. And as he's getting his briefcase right over his shoulder, I see this psychedelic fireball coming down over Sedona. And it didn't make a sound when it hit. And it turns out the days before that, there was another fireball that came down over Flagstaff. And a father and a son saw the thing hit the ground, didn't make a sound when it hit the ground. And then, 2 days later, I saw some strange lights outside of my window, and I took some pictures on my digital camera and blew them up, and sure enough, it was a UFO. So when I see things like that, I can't think that meteors are all just coming down over Sedona. I mean, the odds of the randomness of that are just illogical. I know, I'm very, very aware of the weapon we have. So the crash retrieval process, the process of retrieving saucers, it's very, very clear that we have been able to get them and actually work on them. And one of the things Boyd told me, and some of this videotape is really long, so I'm not going to show it here. It's going to be in a new documentary I'm working on. He goes into this lengthy conversation about all of him and his buddies who, have worked at Area 51 and acknowledges Bob Lazar. And he basically says it's an underfunded program. The research, a lot of money went into reverse engineering UFO technology, and we can produce anti-gravity, yes. But he starts to talk about the materials that the craft are made of on the periodic table of elements are materials we don't even know how to manufacture ourselves. We don't even know how to do it. But I've been able to get enough information from Boyd Bushman in my presentation last year to build a set of blueprints and get confirmation on my design actually from 2 different sources. And you're about to see those. And it's so conclusively clear when I reveal my greatest secret to you that these blueprints are not just kind of random sketches, that we could actually build this thing and see if it flies. I gave, several years ago, 4 years ago, a set of my blueprints to a very, very high-level university in the United States, which I cannot name, and they took it to one of the top labs in Europe, particle physics research labs, and they apparently gave me play-by-play reports. They built my saucer, and it flew through the roof and blew a hole in the ceiling, very similar to the John Searle's first story, and it flew. And then they eventually built another one which they controlled, and I didn't know whether to believe the story. I mean, I was getting emails, and I was talking to an agent who actually was chasing men in black suits, and here I am in a black suit, being chased by, was it me? It wasn't me, because I wouldn't be here today telling you the truth. But, so now we're going to go inside of the craft. And, Boyd had first told us something very, very simple. He said that they produced anti-gravity as a very simple experiment, which anybody in this room can do. They got really good quality neodymium magnets, very, very high quality. He bought 2 that were $5,000 a piece with a donut hole in the middle, toroidal shape, and they bolt them together. You know how magnets like to push away when the poles are alike? And he forces the poles together and bolts it down and wraps it in a plaster to look like a rock. He drops it off a 60-some-odd foot tower at Lockheed, revisiting Galileo, and a hammer and a nail would both fall at the same speed because that's what gravity does. A lighter object does not fall towards gravity any faster than a heavy object. So Boyd's opposing magnetic fields fall slower every time. Since I left the Congress last year, he had Russian scientists confirm the same experiment. And there are people who have done it in Sedona. Very, very simple thing to do. So we know that that is the core of what produces anti-gravity, is slamming, basically fields together. In fact, that's one of the things that Bob Lazar said with element 115. They slammed the fields together and you produced anti-gravity. Well, and then Boyd showed, last year you saw it, photographs of winged aircraft where they lowered these huge electromagnets. I mean, they were so heavy, at no point in the world could fly, and they were literally producing anti-gravity in these classified aircraft. So F-117s that don't make any noise, giant triangular craft, which is what Lockheed builds, not making any noise, are using this system. However, the system they're using is forcing miniature nuclear-powered energy into electromagnets, which are very simple. You can just use neodymium or iron and wrap some wire around them and force a lot of energy into them, was what we were using to produce the anti-gravity. So you would get a lot of radioactivity. In fact, it was interesting because Santiago Echeverria was telling me that the footage you saw last year of the guy in Texas with the little dog in the yard and the UFO came really close and it affected the videotape, that the little dog apparently died or got sick a few days later, and so did the family, from radiation. And the tape was damaged from radiation. That was in Texas. Lockheed Martin is in Texas. The Cash Landrum incident was also in Texas. Radiation burns. Lockheed Martin's all over Texas. And this may shock you, but Boyd Bushman actually told me the Stephenville UFO, the big black triangle now, go back to the incident. How many people know Stephenville? Okay, almost everybody. Was being escorted by Lockheed fighter jets. And you now are aware that we have this weapon. Do you really believe that if we thought that was an alien craft and we were flying F-16s or F-22s anywhere near it, that we wouldn't shoot it down with our beam weapon? Why didn't we? Because it belongs to Lockheed Martin. And if you notice, all of Lockheed Martin's aircraft, their advanced ones, are all black triangles. And now this may sound crazy if you go to the Phoenix Lights incident. It was a mile-wide triangle, and maybe Stephenville as well, and we'd like to think that's extraterrestrial. But when the triangle over the Phoenix Lights stopped in front of Phoenix in South Mountain, Goodyear, Arizona is right underground, right underneath the craft, and Lockheed Martin is right there. So I believe it's possible the Phoenix Lights UFO actually came from Tooele, Utah, which is where Boyd Bushman says the new Area 51 is, just north of the northern part of the state of Arizona, which is where the first witnesses saw the Phoenix Lights craft. So we've seen enough craft, but when I knew about the opposing magnetic fields, and I also demonstrated how I believe in crop circles, there are blueprints that reveal something very, very similar. Barbara Lamb showed you the clockwise, counterclockwise weaves in the grass, and we know there's clockwise, counterclockwise fields in opposing field magnets. Jeff Willis, years ago, gave me this piece of footage, and a lot of you have seen it, of the flying saucer. May 24th, 2003, and May 24th, 2005, left and right. And I took it into my editing bay, and I noticed, because it's interlaced video, two video frames interlaced like a comb, and it's handheld, two of the frames kind of went jagged on each other, and I saw this double impression. And when I blew it up, if you look at the lower image on the lower left, it's like a ghost. You're seeing through the black dome of the UFO right on the top, and you're seeing into the core of the flying saucer. And this is what it looks like inside, only in a few frames. I know what that means. I know what I'm looking at there. I'm looking at a concave-shaped Tesla coil. You can see the sunlight shining off of the edge of it right there. But you can't see the outer skin of the UFO. You're seeing into the inside. And that is because of the X-rays and the ultraviolet energy coming from the powerful magnetic drives in the center of the craft are giving you a picture of the inside, just in a few video frames. But also, just below the very, very shiny image there, you can actually see down in here a double impression of a wider coil. So narrower coil and wider coil here. So I knew what that meant. I knew that there were two coils interlaced with each other, and they were going to produce counter-rotational electromagnetic fields that were going to slam into each other, and there was a differential between them, meaning they have different wavelengths or different diameters. And of course, if you saw my presentation last year, you know the differentials are the key to zero-point energy. But what interests me the most about this is that concave Tesla coils, as opposed to straight cylindrical coils, would lens the radio waves to these conversion points here. And that is very significant. Remember, when Lockheed Martin produces anti-gravity, they're converting their electricity into radio waves, electromagnetism, and throwing it all into space, which is why everybody gets radiated. But if you can lens the radio waves, just imagine a lens right here, a camera lens, how it focuses light, like a magnifying glass. Radio waves can do the same thing with a concave coil. What exists right here in a UFO? Well, we know. Let me just actually go forward here. Right here. What's on the rim of the UFO? There's a rim, a perfect place where you can put another ring coil and you can recapture that energy and fire it back into the center of the drive of the UFO. Now, this is actually what the very, very simple crude electromagnets look like. You know, how many people in high school you did this? You wrap copper wire around an iron shaft and you run electricity through it and you got a magnet. But what's interesting about this is if you take two iron rods and you wrap the wire clockwise, so you have like fields, because remember, if you have opposite fields, the magnets attract, but like fields repel. If you take them both and they're both spinning clockwise, to you that's counterclockwise, and you spin one around to the other side, this one appears counterclockwise to this one. So that's why you get the counter-rotational spin in the field of the UFO. And in this crop circle, very interesting, you know, flipping the lid off of the top of the three-dimensional view of the saucer, you would get a clockwise, counterclockwise coil facing each other. So it's really identical to what I'm talking about here. Then what I did is I measured the diameter on a scale model, very, very large scale model of the image, of the first impression of the concave coil. You can see the sunlight shining off the metal rim here. And then the ghost-like impression of the wider coil, which I believe is sitting right on top of this. And the ratio I got was Fibonacci, the 1 to 1.618. And that's pretty interesting. So here's your side view of the inside of my proposed saucer, the concave coils, two of them inside of each other. Here's your narrow one, and here's your wider one. And then they slam opposing fields into each other in the center, and the radio waves don't just scatter and go into space. You recycle them when they hit the converging points here, the magnification points here. This is the top view of the saucer. That electricity in the form of radio waves would, through the photoelectric effect, which is just radio waves or sunlight hitting steel, you can recycle them back into electrons with these circuits and fire them back into the center of the drive. So it becomes more efficient. And also, you're not radiating your environment. So these are what the circuits would look like on a side view. Very interesting when you look at this particular image of one of the Meyer UFOs, and you can see this on a lot of UFOs. Notice the two impressions on the bottom. Those are your two coils. The narrower coil, the wider coil. You see those there? I don't know how good how dark that image is there. But there are two impressions there. And then you see the circuits on the rim, just like I had proposed. So, now, if that wasn't enough, I had kept those blueprints on my own for years. Years and years and, years. Almost, 8 or 9 years now. And all of a sudden, my friend Jamie Berta said to me, there's an interesting video on YouTube, but it doesn't have very many views. And we got in touch with this young man. And what he did is he took 2 Colin Andrews crop circles and he spun them in 3D in AutoCAD. And you're about to see a little video, his little video presentation. And whether or not, crop circles are created by aliens or it's our military beaming images into the crops via satellite, somebody wanted us to see these blueprints. And they are identical to mine. It's only 3 minutes long. So this is your Colin Andrews crop circle turned into a black and white schematic. He's going to reverse the white out, get rid of the white, and bring it into an architecture program called AutoCAD. And he's going to take two crop circles in a row and he's going to interface them together. It just take a couple of minutes. When I saw this, I just about hit the floor. This is what the first schematic turns into in a three-dimensional environment. This is like your component number one. And he's going to spin it here in a second so you can see the center of the reactor. You see the concave edges on the central coil, just like I have. And there are some other parts in here that I actually don't have. And he spins it. And he's going to take the second circle, and he'll do this much faster. This is the second part. He's going to put both of them together. There you are. Three-dimensional view of the inside of your flying saucer. You see the concave rim on the inner coils, the two rings, the two toroidal rings on the top and the bottom, and the spheres on the top and the bottom. And I'm showing this video with permission from the Nicola who discovered this. Hardly anybody knows who he is at this point in time. And I've shared my blueprints with him. And he's telling me that he's already built a small-scale model and it levitates. It flies. I'm going to meet him sometime in the next couple of months. We're scheduling a meeting right now. So there you go. I mean, it's very clear somebody, extraterrestrial or not, wants us to know how these craft work. Last year I showed you video clips of FBI, FOIA files and photographs of a July 8, 1947 report in North Hollywood where an aluminum flying saucer crash landed into a woman's yard. And when the fire department came, this thing was flying anti-gravitic, flying around Hollywood, California. Same day as the Roswell incident. It was a toy flying saucer, 3 feet wide, built by a kid who worked at Chevron, 14 years old. And again, when you opened it up, it looks very, very similar. So, I think it's just conclusively clear here that with these kind of schematics and blueprints, in full detail, that we can build this. We can actually build this. And I've been waiting for over 10 years for somebody to come forward and say, let's build it. I've showed them this kind of stuff. And I'm really amazed that there's so little passion. There's so little passion in Congress. There's so little passion in the investment community to make the revolution into anti-gravity, to take the quantum leap, so that we're not just staring at UFOs, we're flying them in the future, the very, very near future. And I have enough, evidence to believe that this thing will really, really fly. Now, when we look also back here in this, if you look up here, there are two toroidal ring field generators on the top and the bottom. And I want to show video clip number 3, please, coming up. My friend Jamie Burduff, I read about him in the Sedona newspaper, doing counter-rotational field generators with copper wire wound in a sacred geometry designed by Marco Rodin. Jamie Burduff was able to produce a very simple ring-shaped toroidal transformer that he puts 2 amps of power and just 2 or 3 volts, 2.5 volts, And he's able to produce 200 amps with the same voltage in the core. That is 200, almost 100 times over unity. And you're going to actually see this. He's going to show you the electronic meters. I mean, if that isn't zero-point energy, I don't know what is. I mean, and these are the kind of parts, components that we're going to use in building this flying saucer if we can actually get the funding to do it. So we're looking at...
Hi everybody, this is Jamie Buter. This is a short video. I wanted to show some of the aspects of the latest coil that I have designed. As you can see, it's a very different toroidal coil than some of the commercial ones you might have or might be familiar with. This is a very specific design of mine where I incorporate different geometric shapes. Well, repeating geometric shapes in this coil. It's a bifilar coil. One of the circuits goes this way, the other circuit crosses over it in a specific angle. Okay, and I have several, and that does that several times here in the center. And it's a specific geometric pattern that I've created, and it goes along with the way I'm going to pulse the coil. It's a very specific way I'm going to pulse the coil or energize the coil, and it pertains to the mathematical geometry of the coil that I just finished putting together here, that I'm experimenting with today. What have we got here to the right is an amp meter, and it's right now, as you can see, it's reading 0, so there is no energy going through the coil right now. There are my 4 leads coming off of my amplifier, my left and right, positive and negative. Okay, and the amplifier is then hooked up to my laptop, and the laptop is what I'm going to be using to pulse the coil with. It has the frequency and the very specific way that I'm going to pulse this coil that I've developed in the laptop. So and then this meter here is what I'm going to use to show you what the amplification of energy is around the poloidal diameter of this coil, which is this way. All right, so let's get started. Let me get this energized. Okay, so now we're drawing roughly 1.5 amps coming into the coil. Now let's see what we've got around the diameter. Looking at 212 amps. Okay, as you can see, let me show you the settings I got here. As you can see, I've got it set at 600 amps. It's a Fluke 32 meter, very good, high quality meter. It's set at 600 amps. All right, we're reading about 212. Okay, so that's roughly what 116 or so times energy amplification. So we got 1.6 amps going in, and 210, 212 in the center of the coil. That's a very significant energy amplification. One of the other things I wanted to show you, let me get this out of the way. What I have here is a 1-inch neodymium sphere magnet. It's a grade N42, and when I stick it in the middle of the coil, it starts to spin, but not only spins, but it actually, the magnetic field holds it very tightly to the center of the coil. Okay, I can wobble it around a little bit, but it's essentially levitating in the center of the coil very powerfully. I can turn this thing around and it won't fall out. It's a very strong magnetic field. Alrighty, well, that was all I wanted to show. Thank you for watching.
I mean, that just blows my mind, because we're talking about the only difference between Jamie's toroidal ring-shaped coil and traditional transformers is the geometry in which he's wound it with. The sacred geometry in which he's wound it with. And he's also running his electric current. He purifies his current, which is a proprietary part of the invention. And he runs it counterclockwise, clockwise and counterclockwise, just like everything we've been looking at since last year and this year. And it's a very simple math formula. Volts times amps equals watts, and watts is the total energy burned. A lot of free energy devices or zero-point energy devices, you see an increase in voltage, which is just your flow potential or your electric potential energy or your actual flow of energy. And amperage is the amount of energy. So Jamie's volts stayed the same. His amps went up over 100 times. So if you do the math, volt times amps equals watts. Clearly, it is not. It is clearly producing a huge amount of energy. So I sent, Jamie's videos to Boyd Bushman, and I said, Jamie can put in, 2 amps and get 180 out, because he was up to 180 at that point. And he's been using my differentials and read my paper, and he's been able to make a lot of improvements. In fact, we're going to be using some better, more exotic materials for the core of his donut, very similar to the pendants I have at my table. How many people have either worn or seen the pendants where you see your body electricity goes into the coil, it's toroidal, and you wear it. It's just using your body electricity, and there's a huge increase in energy. I'll show you a little schematic of that in a few minutes. So the point is, it's the geometry in which the energy flows which causes the huge increase in energy, massive increase of energy. So if we look at this kind of technology and we look at the blueprints we just showed you, it's fairly clear that different people are getting different pieces of the puzzle. I'm looking at what Boyd Bushman showed us at Lockheed Martin about the opposing magnetic fields. I'm looking at Jeff Willey's UFO, where I can see right through the middle, and I can see, because of the concave coils, I can recycle the energy instead of throwing it all away. And we're seeing the crop circle blueprints are giving us a clean, very, very clean schematic of how to make this work. And on that schematic, there were two ring-shaped coils like Jamie had on the top and the bottom. So this is that part. So I really believe we're there. We're really there. We can build it. All we need is somebody who loves flying, who loves to go into the air, like Richard Branson, or somebody who wants to send civilians into space to do this. It's not that expensive. It's not billions of dollars or anything like that, or even hundreds of millions. And so we can actually do this. Now, last year, I opened up my lecture with my discovery on differentials, the hidden harmonic codes of the universe. And I told you what zero-point energy really means. What does it mean? It means that in the void of space, at a temperature of absolute zero, which is actually colder than space itself. Space is minus 273 degrees Kelvin, and then you go to absolute zero, which is down in the minus 400 range. So at that level, with absolutely no temperature, it was believed by Einstein and his colleagues that if there's no temperature, there's no energy in this absolute zero place in the universe. Because most energy formulas convert either mass and heat into motion, or electromagnetism, which is also heat, into energy. So if there's no heat, there can't be any energy. And Einstein and Max Planck fought with each other for about 10 years, and eventually Einstein agreed the void of space was supercharged with energy at the zero-point level. And at the zero-point level, there are very, very high frequency fluctuations. So high in frequency that it's literally beyond the highest frequency energy domains we currently understand today. See, basically, if we look at radio waves, say maybe oscillating at a diameter this big, right, the longer the orbit of the wave, the lower the amount of energy it contains. And then by the time you get to red, the color red, you might be here, and then blue here. You see what I'm saying? The higher the frequency of the oscillation of the wave, there's more energy there. So a blue photon, blue light, has more energy in it than red, and red has more energy than radio waves and microwaves. And then you eventually get to ultraviolet, which has more energy than blue and violet, and then you eventually get to X-rays and gamma rays. And gamma rays have, and 10-second gamma ray bursts will release more energy than our sun will in its multi-billion-year lifetime. So when you're talking about the zero-point field, you eventually reach places beyond the gamma ray spectrum. How many people here saw my part one of quantum communication that was shown at the film festival here? William Tiller at Stanford proposes that subtle energy, and subtle is really not the right word in my opinion, because it's not weak and subtle, vibrates higher in frequency than the gamma ray spectrum. Consciousness does. That means if you convert that through a very simple formula in Einstein, converting energy back into mass, the subtle energy force in the universe is more powerful than a 10-second gamma ray burst. It's more powerful than our sun's entire lifetime of solar energy. And this force can actually be accessed by the power of the mind itself. And then I told you how differentials work, how you need differentials, harmonic differentials, to pull energy out of the zero-point field and bring it into our space. Imagine a sunny day in Arizona and there's no wind, and it's 100 degrees outside, and all of a sudden a cloud comes over. And imagine a sunny day in Arizona and there's no wind, and it's 100 degrees outside, and all of a sudden a cloud comes over and cools down a little patch of air underneath it. That produces a temperature differential. Hot, cold. What happens? The wind blows. Energy moves. Energy needs a differential to move between one place and another. So I propose that Newton's third law, Newton is the great physicist who preceded all the physicists in our age, including Einstein and Max Planck. He said every action has an equal and opposite reaction. And I said, well, the more I look into the quantum universe and everywhere in nature, that isn't true. I'm seeing that every action has a reaction, but there's a difference or a differential leftover vibration between those reactions. And I showed you my presentation. Well, just at the end of the conference, I was talking with Mark Cuthbert. Mark, are you out there anywhere? There he is. And we were talking about the idea of the Great Pyramids being an actual stargate, an electronic stargate between here and a distant star system in the Orion belt. And I thought, how could that possibly work? And I really worked on this problem, and thanks to Mark, he really got me thinking about it. And when I worked on the problem, I realized what the answer was. And we're going to move towards the idea of building a stargate, an actual stargate, and how it works using very, very simple harmonic technology with my new breakthroughs in differentials, the hidden harmonic codes of the universe. So using my galactic clock, this is my galactic clock that I measure subatomic particles, galaxies, and solar orbits and planetary orbits with. And with this clock, I was actually able to show how you can actually break the speed of light. It's a very long kind of presentation to get into that, so we're not going to go there. I also showed how the Earth has different rings. It has the Van Allen radiation belts, the purple that you see here, and then you have the green plasma pause, and they're spinning counter-rotational to each other, clockwise and counterclockwise. And we notice that the purple here is a shorter wavelength than the green here. And the gray here, the magnetopause, is an even longer belt of energy. So we see how there is no such thing as equal and opposites. There are spaces between waves that are called differentials, which cause energy to move out of zero-point field. In fact, after I enhanced my study on differentials, just recently the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration took an interest in this paper and read it, and it's now circulating all over the administration because I predicted the graviton, the missing particle in physics, the one particle that nobody can find. I mean, everybody can see the effects of gravity. They're the most obvious thing, but we can't make that thing go up. We don't understand it. We have to find this particle called the graviton, and I predicted it was in the differential between the electron and the positron, that the graviton was not a particle, it was a differential between the motion of two particles. And the NOAA told me that they've noticed differentials in gravity, in their measurements on gravity at the South Pole, and that's why many scientists over there are reading my paper now. And if that's true, the graviton and the force of gravity is the differential. It is not a particle. And if you know that, and you understand how the graviton works, you can produce anti-gravity. And that is what the blueprints you've seen are all about. This is a very simple example for those of you who don't remember what a differential is. If two waves were coming along with the exact same amplitude and force and speed and they hit each other, it would look like that when they hit, and they would just cancel each other out. But you never see that in nature. You see this. Two waves. This wave is going 5 miles an hour, this one 4, and it curls over. The differential is right here in the curl on the crest of a wave. Those are very simple differentials. And then we looked at the quantum universe. These are real photographs from bubble chambers of electron-positron pairs. And the first thing I did is, if you look at the red versus the white wavelength, the red is going to complete an oscillation here sooner than this will, which means the electron and the positron are not equal and opposite. Yet physicists today at the Large Hadron Collider and searching for the God particle, they all keep telling us that every particle cancels the other guy out to zero. It is not true. It's very, very obvious. I wrote Frank Close, who's a world-renowned particle physicist, and he said, I just got lucky, just showed up in one photograph. I showed him another pair of electron-positrons here, and we can see that this is obviously wider than this. But since we were here last year, I decided to measure the diameters of electron-positrons to see what the ratio was, because the magic number between them would tell me what the graviton's number really is. What is the harmonic code of gravity? And I didn't know this last year. This is very, very brand new. So right here on the left, I blew this diameter of this orbit up to 10 centimeters, and I measured the next one, which is its counterpartner, the electron, and its diameter was 9 centimeters. And if you divide 9 into 10, you get 1.111111. And this little 1.1111 guy, I end up finding out is everywhere. In fact, it's more prevalent than Fibonacci's sequence, the 1 to 1.618. And I did this all in the last year. And literally, studying dozens of models of subatomic particles, I find, I'm going to speed through this, find the 1.11, because this is all from last year. We did the, and for those of you who haven't seen my presentation last year and want to get caught up, you should get the video here at the Congress. This is my swimming pool experiment, looking at man-made geometries on how all the sides are equal. It's very, very wrong, because in nature, like this crystal, all of the sides produce uneven numbers. And I do all this math. I did math on the sound of the sun water crystal, and I generate my numbers for my differentials. So I decided to measure an orchid, a flower, and I measured the 2 petals from the center, and I blew the image up, and this was 5 centimeters and 4.5 centimeters and 5 centimeters. And when you divide the numbers, you get the 1.11111, not Fibonacci. Everybody knows about Fibonacci's 1 to 1.618, but that's not what I was getting. And the galaxy, the spiral arms of a galaxy, I actually blew this up to a very large scale, 20 centimeters from the dead center to here, and 18 centimeters here. You divide those into each other, you get the 1.1111. It's everywhere. Everywhere. And you can clearly see, if you get a trained eye, when you're looking at a Fibonacci ratio versus the 1.111. Now, what's amazing about this little 1.111 guy, if I can find my little calculator in here, I don't know where it is in here, but I'll just tell you what it is. I believe in the creation of the universe, for those of you who follow sacred geometry, the idea that 2 spheres collided and formed the Vesica Pisces upon the moment of the Big Bang. I believe the ratio between these 2 spheres was a 9 and a 10 ratio, which produces the 1.111. I believe it's the mother of all harmonic codes in the universe, because it is virtually everywhere. If you square 1.111 on your calculator, which just means times itself, you get 1.2345678 It's the birth of the numerical sequence. And so what I do, why are these numbers so important? Why is the 1.11 so important? Because if you build your wave generators with these dynamics and produce these aren't frequencies, these are differentials, then you tap into what that number represents, which is the power of creation. NASA's Ulysses, flown over the sun's poles 3 times between 1994 and 1995, one big puzzle revealed by previous flybys is the temperature of the sun's poles. In the previous solar cycle, the magnetic North Pole was about 80,000 degrees, or 8% cooler than the South Pole. They didn't know this. Nobody knows. Why should there be a difference? No one knows. This is NASA. My differentials discovery tells you why there's a differential. Studying differentials all throughout the solar system. This is Saturn's North Pole. You see the hexagon structure up on the North Pole here? Finally, they photographed it dead on, so I blew it up to scale, and I found my centers, and I found 9s and 10s, ratios of 9s and 10s everywhere, and that's 1.11111. It's everywhere. It's the secret to gravity. I showed you it in the electron and the positron, which is where I predict the graviton is. You have to know this number if you want to find the graviton. I thought, the 1.11 is definitely it. One night recently, my wife woke up with a dream, and she was given this math formula. And that's about a harmonic set of numbers that meant nothing to her. Huge numbers, like 2200 and something and another number. And I divided the numbers into each other, and I got 1.33333. I thought, wow, what are the odds that my wife would have a dream and give me a number of a ratio like that. And that same night, I had a dream that an angel was holding a new instrument in its hand, and it played this instrument, and it caused a stone to levitate, to float. And I knew that the instrument's ratio of its dimensions, which is secret, I'm not going to show it here, was what my wife had dreamt, which is the 1.3333. So I decided to look at electron-positron orbits even deeper. I blew these two pairs up really big, not as big, very, very small that you see here. And I produced the 1.33333. I was so blown away. My God, the 1.333. And I realized when I looked at more and more electron-positron orbits, they were all producing Archimedes infinities. 1.222s, 1.111s, 1.333s, 1.444s, 1.555s. The electron was spitting out all these infinity numbers rather than numbers that just end, like 1.2396, and then it just ends. And what's amazing about decimal systems is if I write a 0.1111 and the numbers keep going that way, on a scale of size, the further the ones go this way, the smaller the space I'm going to enter. And if we know that zero-point energy's wavelength is ultra, ultra small, smaller than the Planck scale, which is the smallest measurement ever made, I know that my infinities are going to reach the zero-point field. And the electron-positrons were producing all of the infinities, the 1.11, 1.333s, which means matter itself was vibrating all the way down to the zero-point field. The creation of all of matter was pulling energy from the smallest wavelengths, which is the highest power in the universe. And what William Tiller discovers is mind, if it knows this great secret called the coupling mechanism, a coupling that occurs on this very, very tiny scale. And certain human beings seem to have more of this than others, that brain can interface with this consciousness and access a power scale that would make all propulsion systems completely obsolete. I believe there are extraterrestrials, angelic extraterrestrials, who power their ships with this super, super high frequency energy, and they don't need any machines at all. So I took a piece of pyrite cube, I measured the cube. Of course, the sides all look perfectly square, but they're not. And I generated 23s and 24s and 22s, and I found that, basically everything in creation on the periodic table of elements, from salt to metal to iron to aluminum to hydrogen, everything has differentials. But why is it in school, when they teach us about the periodic table of elements, hydrogen is a hexagon, but all the sides are equal, lithium is a cube, and platinum is cubic faced, but every side is equal? That's because they don't see the secret of the differential. This is the water crystal before in the upper left and after we exposed it to the sound of the sun. And I didn't do this last year either. This is thanks to my friend Jamie Burduff, who did the coil you saw. We took the sound of the sun and we decided, because last year I had measured the radius or the center of the circle to the outer rims, and I got differentials on all the radiuses of the circle. But what he did is he took a measurement in the degrees in the angle between them. We're leading towards the Great Pyramid here as a stargate. You're going to actually see how all that stone is going to produce a huge harmonic field. And so we measured the angle, and we found they were all off by almost 1 degree or just a little bit more than 1 degree. Why aren't all the sides equal? Why are they different? Because if they were all equal, it wouldn't produce differentials. Now we're going to come to the Great Pyramid discovery. Oh, this is really, really huge. Huge news. October 30th, 2009, New York Times. I was so excited about this. Couldn't even believe it. What happened is, with NASA's new invisible telescope, looking at the center of the Milky Way galaxy, which NASA is getting a better and better picture of as we approach 2012, they found in the center of the galaxy something that shouldn't be there. A black hole in the center of the galaxy, if there is such a thing as a black hole, should be devouring everything in the center of the black hole. And they could see a cloud of dark matter in the center of the black hole, giving birth, not death, not destroying, super high energy electrons. Now, I predicted last year, before I left here, that dark matter, which is invisible matter to us, and dark energy, which is a polarity matrix, that the differential between dark matter and dark energy is where we extract mass and energy out of the invisible universe into the physical universe, which would explain why Hubble sees the whole universe expanding. But there was no proof that that was happening. But this experiment, looking in the center of the galaxy, it was very clear that dark matter was giving birth to super high energy particles in the form of gamma rays and microwaves. And it was leaving the black hole and not going into it. In the pursuing months, very, very recently, astronomers were looking at distant galaxies in their black hole, and they're seeing the birth of water in the center of a galaxy. Water. What's water doing being born out of a black hole? If that's a black hole that's sucking everything into it. Being born, and how does water survive? How does this stuff survive the super high temperatures in galactic center? Turns out the astronomers found that it was creating a membrane around itself to protect itself. That's a cell. That's intelligent life. That's what our cells are. They're just water with a membrane. The ancient Maya believed their god, Canub-Ka, resides in the center of the galaxy. I believe that all life is being born in the center of the galaxy, not dying. And it's coming out of the differential between dark matter and dark energy. All of these things have happened in the last year. But now, this is, the idea of the Great Pyramids as a Stargate. I mean, this is just unbelievable. Unbelievable stuff. I was not the one who discovered the ratio between the Great Pyramid here and the other pyramids was the same as the 3 stars in Orion's belt. Of course, this is backwards, upside down here. That was already known, but I did know that their ratio represents a harmonic relationship. That there's no 3 stars in the sky that, if you look at them from Earth, have that exact same ratio between them. So we thought of the idea, if the pyramids were a perfect reflection of Orion's belt, how could we prove that the pyramids made of stone with copper or gold capstones could be used to create a stargate, an actual stargate, to either spiritually or physically teleport to that distant star system? So what I did, of course, is I took measurements on the Great Pyramid here. We measured you look at the best quality measurements you can get in royal cubits, and everybody thinks, well, it's square, so all the sides are even. Well, they're not. The north side was 439.767 cubits. The south side was 440.05, so they're only off by 1. The east, 439.93, and the west, 439.87. And, traditionally it was thought that that's just got to be a mistake. They meant all the sides to be even. But you saw in the crystals that I showed you last year how none of the sides of a quartz crystal, the 6 sides, are equal lengths. They're all different. So I wasn't surprised that I saw this, and I didn't believe it was a mistake by the builders. So what I did, of course, first, I measured on scale, the distance between point A and point B, and the distance between B and C, and I did the math, and I generated these numbers, 0.954, 54, 454545. So I got an infinity, and I thought, well, those are the numbers that represent the ratio looking at Earth at Orion's belt. And I thought, okay, those are my numbers, and those numbers are proprietary to the Orion's belt star system. And what's interesting about the observer and observed effect is that if a camera is on Earth and it's looking at a distant star system, the Big Dipper, any of them, the Pleiades, and you flatten that into a 2-dimensional photograph like this. This is 2 dimensions, X and Y. It doesn't have depth. And if you measure the distances between all the stars and do ratios between their distances, that is proprietary to the observer and the observed. Think of the observer and the observed in the quantum universe. If I'm over here looking at Orion's belt, the ratios are going to look different between the stars in a 3-dimensional space. So if I vibrate those harmonic codes into the ether, into the universe between the stars in a three-dimensional space. So, if I vibrate those harmonic codes into the ether, into the universe, the Sirius star system, or Orion's belt, knows that there's only one place that sees me with that exact ratio, and that's Earth. Very, very interesting. Now, when we measure the slope in degrees on the Great Pyramid, we get 90 degrees, 89 degrees, 89 degrees, and 90 degrees, all off by 1 degree, just like my water crystal. That is not a mistake. This is clearly a harmonic code generator, just like my water crystal. The angle between here and here and here and here is off just by a little bit of degrees. So I generate all my numbers on the Great Pyramid, and it's really amazing, the four sides, looking down at the square. My ratio is 1 to 0.999, and the numbers vary depending on the side. So I entered that into my catalog, and I went, wait a minute, I know what that number is. We talked last year in the very beginning that Archimedes' student, Eratosthenes, was the first one of the Greeks, and no one preceding him, not even in ancient Egypt, could tell us the circumference of the Earth at the equator. And it was Eratosthenes who pointed, with his sextant and calculated 1 degree on the horizon and knew there were 360 degrees in a circle. And he measured that degree on the horizon equaling a certain distance on the Earth, and he multiplied it by 360, and he came up with the roughly 24,000 mile circumference of the Earth. Well, there was no way the Greeks could have known, and no one could know unless you had access to outer space, that when NASA came along with radio telemetry, they would measure the pole-to-pole circumference and the equator-to-equator circumference and find out there was a difference, or a differential. And guess what the number of the ratio of the differential of the planet Earth is? 1 to 0.996. And the pyramid is 0.999. 99% accurate, the same harmonic code is in the base of the pyramid and the Earth. And I believe that third decimal point would be corrected, because the Earth is a slight egg, at the position at Cairo on the egg. Every position on the egg in 3 or 4 decimal places later is going to have a different number. I believe it's 100% accurate to Cairo. Now, there's no way the builders of the pyramids could have known those numbers unless they had access to space, because even the Greeks could not figure it out, which means this is a mathematical case of proof that the pyramids were built by beings who had access to space. But what are the pyramids being used for? Well, this gets even more and more amazing. And this just happened very, very recently. I decided to take another electron-positron because I noticed the electron-positron was a slight ellipse. It wasn't a perfect circle, just like the Earth. And the electrons are what spin around all of the atoms with which our bodies are made of, the rocks, this stuff, the water. I wanted to know that same ratio, this way versus this way, on the atom and see if it's the same as the Earth. And guess what? 12 divided into 12.5 centimeters, which is the scale I blew it up to, is 1 to 0.99. When the bigger you blow it up, it's the same number. It's the same number, which means all of the harmonic codes in the atoms in your body are all vibrating with the same harmonic code as the planet itself. And that means a distant star system or a distant planet, even in our solar system, has its own harmonic code. This is where it starts to get really interesting. In quantum mechanics, this is very important to know this, but in quantum mechanics, any two systems that are entangled with each other, that share the same wave properties, and you separate them, if you separate the electron and the positron, and they're not equal wavelengths, but if you separate them and you alter the wave functions of this electron, the positron, even 1,000 miles away, will, faster than light, copy it. Which proved that in quantum entanglement, everything communicates faster than the speed of light. And that is really amazing, because even though quantum physicists don't know how to do what I'm about to tell you, they do know that there is a math, a set of wave functions, frequency, amplitude, and spin, and different functions that determine whether two systems are entangled. And no matter how far you separate those two little twins of each other, they communicate faster than light. But what if I could mathematically identify the harmonic code of a distant star system? And I knew its math. And I knew that the pyramid itself, made of stone, very, very interesting, because stone acts as an electronic capacitor. What would happen if I could produce entanglement at a distance? Because I would get Earth's harmonic codes, which I just demonstrated. All of our atoms in our body are vibrating at, and so is the planet. All has the same harmonic code, 1 to 0.99. And the base of the pyramid has the same harmonic code as Earth, but yet its ratio of pyramids has the same harmonic ratio as Orion's belt. Does that mean that the pyramids mathematically are in an entangled relationship with Orion's belt? Well, to me it does, because I know the secret of the power of stone. I know that stone acts as an electronic capacitor. It can hold a very, very weak amount of electricity. And the human body, for those of you who have been by my booth here, we take these pendants, these rose quartz and all kinds of different materials, and we expose them to my harmonic codes. We expose them to the 1.1111 and the NASA sound of the sun and Fibonacci as well. And they really hold the vibration really well. There's no energy in the stone, and yet, for people who have been by, before and after, we measure your voltage in your body, your millivolts before, and when you connect with the stone, your voltage goes way up in your body. And we also photograph the human aura before and after. How come there's energy flowing when I'm not using a battery? I'm just using harmonics. Well, we know the secret to zero-point energy is not about more fuel and more fire and more fossil fuels and nuclear power. We know it has to do with harmony, because we know Jamie Burduff's coil, the big donut-shaped coil, it was all about the math and the harmony of the way he wound his wire in the shape of a toroid. This is a toroid, a donut. And this is Jamie's windings, which he did for me on these pendants. And all just the harmonics of the windings, he put 2 amps in and he got 200 and something amps out of it. That's all he did. So that tells me that the way the universe works, its secret is that there are harmonies in the universe, almost like Pythagoras' music of the cosmos, the music of the spheres, the music of Madonna. That if you tune into those like a radio station, you receive what that harmonic code represents. You receive the influx of energy. So would the pyramids act, and another thing, I need to express this, as soon as we added the metal windings to the stone, and the metal windings on their own, I did millivolts tests, I got a 0. You cannot move electricity with the human electricity. Our body is running positive and negative ions through our nervous system. We are electrical beings. We have auras. We emit biophotons of energy. But I couldn't move a single amount of energy in the wire by itself. But when the wire touched the stone, I got a huge improvement in my pendants. Now, what used to exist on the top of these huge tons of limestone and pink quartz? Gold capstones. And something happens magically with stone when you interface a conductor grade, metal, copper, and of course gold is the best conductor on top of it. And what would happen if lightning bolts struck the pyramid? I mean, that was one of my first thoughts, is maybe the priest, waited in the king's chamber and waited until a lightning bolt struck one of the pyramids, and then it activated the resonating stone, and the stone became a capacitor, and the harmonic code set up, and that person's body teleported to Orion's belt. And then I thought, well, they must have used something. And how many people have seen that thing that looks like a light bulb? The Egyptians, they're holding the little filament going through it with there's a little round thing on the bottom. I think that was their power source that they brought in to the pyramids they used to activate the field of the stone. Because I use something, in my lab, I have 5 different generators that I built to activate my stones. And Mark had said to me, Mark Cuthbert, who's here working at the conference, had said to me just the other day at dinner, what if we brought one of your resonators to the Great Pyramid and we just tried it out? What would happen? So incredibly far out idea, incredible. The Sirius star system, 8.7 light years away, we know the Egyptians had a relationship with that. you know, that we could actually do something like this. I mean, it can't be a coincidence that all of the math on the Great Pyramid has all of the wave functions of Earth entangled with a distant star system. It just makes perfect sense in quantum mechanics that that is how it works. Any two systems communicating in a quantum entanglement communicate instantaneously faster than light. So I propose there is a great possibility that the pyramids were used to build an actual Stargate, and we could probably, again, build one. It wouldn't be hard to do on a smaller scale and try to teleport something very, very small. And this is another really crazy thing, but let me just show you this really quickly. We've had two people who have this is all about stone and the different, the ancient Sumerians wore these toroids on their wrists. You can see and the god Marduk wearing them with the windings on his wrist. And he's actually got a lot of them around his neck. But I'm going to speed through this because I want to show you this is all about stones. It's all about the power of stones and why we use the toroid. And you can see these at my booth after the event if you haven't seen them and get the voltmeter tested. Speeding up. This was a person's aura, very, very advanced aura camera before and after contact with these charged stones. And you can see on the left, all of their chakras are way out of alignment, and the third and the seventh chakra are way off center. And afterwards, they all become bigger and perfectly aligned, and they're all producing more energy. We can see this woman's aura before, all these breaks in her aura. And, just like a light bulb, if you get more voltage in a light bulb, the light bulb gets brighter, and her aura gets much, much brighter before and after. Now, all that is just stone technology. It's just stone technology. So, again, why the Great Pyramids? Why are the pyramids actually doing this? Why is this happening? Just made of stone. I almost think, you think of the Stone Age, and you think of, the Iron Age, and you think of the Bronze Age, and you think, we speed through these ages, and we come to the modern technological age, and we think, oh, we're past stones. There's nothing interesting about stones. But I think many people in this room who have been to Stonehenge and have been to Egypt can testify that there really is. You can feel, the power of stones. And then we speed by the Bronze Age, and we think, okay, we're past that now because we're making little plastic computer chips, and we don't even need to use copper anymore. And I think we need to almost comb through each one of these ages and revisit them to see, what is really there. So I want to show Boyd clip number 2. This is very, very interesting. Boyd Bushman. Can we roll clip number 2? I mean, it's so wonderful that Boyd, with his background, building weapons and missiles and fighter jets and propulsion systems,
there's a great
wants to go public and tell his stories
that we
about
scratch our heads
how,
about, that once we
if there were more
we'll leave
of the right scientists. Well, let's listen to him.
And it will come from Area 51 and whatever, the whatevers. But I don't think we've begun to scratch that we haven't gone to the bottom of that bucket. We haven't even approached it. When we actually find that many of the components are made using elements we don't know, then how can we say we need to do that time and time and time again? We need to go back to kindergarten and find out how to make elements again.
You're saying that we don't even have the right scientists working on the data.
I'm saying they aren't supported properly.
The right scientists are not supported properly.
Exactly. It's just like I said before. Lack of money will kill science. I've seen technologies die because of lack of money. Just like watering a garden, you keep it watered, you keep it growing, and you get the benefit from it. You don't overwater it, that's called a flood. You don't underwater it, that's called drought. You water it, you bring it along. But you don't allow some idiot to just decide to stop because his brother's not over there. You know, that it isn't providing family to any of his relatives. It isn't providing food to any of his relatives, so it should die. That's stupid, isn't it?
It is.
Oh, well.
All right. So we're underfunded in this area.
In the
What Boyd is really telling us here is that his friends and him who have had access to the craft at Area 51, and more scientists are talking who have had access to the craft at Area 51, you know, it's sitting out there in the middle of the desert, and there are scientists, and there is a lot of money appropriated to black ops and to different projects. And we do have anti-gravity, but it's highly radioactive. And the reason it's highly radioactive, as I proposed, is that we are using nuclear-powered electromagnets, and we're throwing all of our electromagnetism away because we're not lensing and recycling that energy and making the systems more efficient. And we don't even need nuclear power sources because we can do this on a much more efficient level. But what Boyd is saying, there's the buddy system. You know, I was a defense contractor. I worked in landmine and bomb detection for Department of Defense in an Orange County company for 2 years, and I'm still a consultant today for people in Homeland Security. And I'm a shareholder in one of these companies. And, you know, I cared a lot about landmines and bombs, and I found, I mean, this is what really happens. The Princess Diana Landmine Fund wouldn't give us any money because they didn't really want to find the bombs. They just wanted to educate people about them. So you may see huge amounts of money going into black ops, but Boyd is saying it's a buddy system. It's a family system. And he gets meetings with 4-star generals, highest-ranking generals in our country. And he tells them that, you know, we actually have the craft at Area 51 and we need some more funding. But they say, no, just tell me about your new missile. Tell me about your new beam weapon that you're working on and how I'm going to win my war because, you know, I don't have time for that stuff. They actually don't take him seriously. And that's how bad our government cover-up has been on this issue. It's so bad that the presidents don't know, the congressmen certainly don't know, and the senators don't know, but the UFO Congress knows, and the UFO Senate and the House knows, but they don't know. And so he's saying that there are good scientists whom if we funded, we could actually do a better job at reverse engineering the Roswell craft and other crash retrievals. But the funding isn't going to the right people. And he's kind of frustrated. You know, Boyd is sitting there and he's saying, I mean, here's a guy who has this huge career at Lockheed, and they don't pay these guys super well for a good reason. They don't want them going off doing their own projects and funding their own science because they pose a potential national security threat if they do. But in a way, that's a mistake. And that's the way a lot of, you know, espionage between Russia and possibly in the future China. You get these retired scientists who have no money and their children are, you know, have very little money, and they get an offer from China to say, okay, or Russia, if you give us your anti-gravity device, you know, we'll pay you really well. And they get tempted. And the security on this stuff is not even as good as you would like to think it is. Well, very few congressmen have ever known the truth, real congressmen in the United States Congress, and senators and generals even. And, you know, Stephen Bassett can tell you about, you know, Jim Jones and Obama's new administration. And there's Jim Jones looking on the internet for zero-point energy devices. And he's a 4-star general and the head of National Security Advisor for Obama. That's his research, YouTube. And I can show him better stuff. If he came here, he would see a better presentation. And they're doing an investigation to over Unity devices, and we're going to use YouTube and spend billions of dollars. So don't look at the amount of money that goes in, because that's the key to what Boyd is saying. It's the buddy system that keeps turning the old wheels, and they don't know what they're looking at. I know the scientist who built the afterburner for Rolls-Royce. Can't tell you his name. He told me in person he was blindfolded, taken in an elevator after he flew on a long plane flight. He believes he was at Area 51. He's a metallurgist. And he looked at the alien bodies, he saw them, and he saw the craft. And they brought him in because they didn't understand the metals, consistent with what Boyd Bushman is saying, the materials. Materials are key, and I have a lot of experience in working with materials, from everything from nuclear fusion that I worked in for 10 years and landmine and bomb detection, to even these little stone pendants that I have. I've seen different types of stone in my field generators do amazing things. I have one type of crystal, only one. It sits there and it sings. It just goes, "Ooh." It makes this high-pitched ringing sound. And I'm not plugging wires into it or anything. It's just sitting in my field generators, and no other stone does that. And that's because every material on the period is high-pitched ringing sound. And I'm not plugging wires into it or anything. It's just sitting in my field generators, and no other stone does that. And that's because every material on the periodic table and combination of materials has proprietary, abilities and properties. And Boyd is saying there's materials on these crafts that we've never seen yet. We don't even understand these materials. And we don't we don't fund the scientists that really know how to do a good job on this. So that stuff is still sitting in there. And yes, we have huge triangular craft at Lockheed. I've confirmed that. And we have the beam weapon. And there's no way I believe that we would, if we really believe the Stephenville UFO or the one over Phoenix was alien, and I know we have this weapon, we would have shot it down for sure. Or we would have tried. And I don't believe with all the F-16s carrying those weapons on them today that we couldn't have shot it down. Because we did successfully shoot down the Roswell flying saucer. And I know there's different theories on that. I know lightning storms. How many people have seen, even when I was in Los Angeles, huge lightning strikes hitting airplanes, commercial airline planes, and a couple of people get a little bit of electrocution, but the plane doesn't go down. I don't believe that story. You can believe whatever you want. I believe the testimony of this man is true. So with that, I beg you to consider that we can build our own. We see all the evidence. It's pointing to us everywhere. We can build it. And if anybody wants to help me, send an email to David Sereda, S-E-R-E-D-A, @hotmail.com, and we'll see what we can do together. Thank you very much. We can take some questions for the last 25 minutes here. If anybody has questions, I guess we can come up to the microphone here.
Thanks. Hello, testing.
Yeah, you just got to get closer to it. Yeah, there you go.
Thanks again, Mr. Sereda. You mentioned that the plane that was shot down by the pilot in Roswell, that the pilot immediately landed and examined the plane?
Examined the UFO, yeah.
Would that have been on, I guess, Highway 60 near Corona?
The question is, and Boyd's testimony from the Navy doctor at Roswell is that we shot down, a young pilot had shot down the Roswell flying saucer with the Tesla death ray. He was being treated for radiation burns from the weapon. But before he went to the hospital, he landed his plane and he made contact and saw the aliens. They were not the Germans.
Are you aware of what the condition of the road? Was it a dirt road or was it a paved road?
I'm not aware of the condition of the road. Is there anybody in tech who can help us with the microphone here? We can maybe get it to work a little better. Oh yeah, we're getting some feedback. That's what it is.
And just one final question on the issue of whether these free energy devices could be converted really easily to weapons.
Well, I think of the Wright brothers. The question is, could zero-point energy devices be used for weapons? When the Wright brothers built the airplane, I'm sure they just wanted to fly. And they had no idea they would become F-117s one day or B-1 bombers. Zero-point energy has profound environmental implications. It obviously can take us way beyond fossil fuels and beyond. In fact, with Jamie's little transformer there, I believe the battery on an electric car will last, 10 times as long at least, if we were to use these things and we knew, if you got a little bit of help to take it to the next level. But the last thing Jamie's thinking is how I'm going to use my zero-point device to power a weapon. We already have a lot of power. We can already power weapons. And I think it's human nature, whether it decides to use any technology, even oil, for good or for evil. Next question.
Yes. Are you familiar with the Monroe Institute and what they're doing with their HemiSync technology?
Oh, of course, yeah.
To create out-of-body experiences.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm wondering if they are aware of your research and the possibilities. I know that they do the differential. They have different frequencies going in each ear, and the differential is a brainwave frequency that seems to enhance the potential to do out-of-body travel. And I'm just wondering, but I think that frequency is they're looking at 7 hertz, right around there. But if it's a... and so
Close to the frequency of the Earth, yeah.
Yeah, if it, but these frequency that you're talking about, the one that is the Earth harmonic...
It's not a frequency, it's a harmonic code. And a harmonic code is the differential between
Yes.
2 frequencies of...
Okay, but that's what's happening. They're doing
2 or more.
2 different frequencies
Yeah,
coming into
I
each
understand.
ear. And it is the differential that seems, that the brain
Right.
seems to...
That's very good observation you made, incredible. I know about those, they're called binaural beats. When you beat
Yes.
the brain with sound of different wavelengths in each ear,
Yeah.
the space between them causes this altered state function to happen.
Yes.
And it's interesting you say that because when I produced the 1.111 in my lab, which was pretty hard to do, to build this new generator, because all of the windings, everything I do, I have to do by hand, because there's no machines that can do it. I do meditation. I meditate every day for 30 years, and I was wondering why when I went in my lab, 10 minutes later, my brain is producing this huge amount of ecstasy. And one day, there was so much pleasure in my brain, I could barely touch the keyboards, because it was like, wow, incredible. And I didn't know if it was the meditation or if it was the 11111. And so what I did is I would go into the lab and not meditate until later that day, or not meditate as much, and it kept happening over and over and over again. And I wrote William Goldman, who's a sound guru, really. William Goldman is amazing if anybody hasn't heard his work. And he said it's probably the binaural beat, but your binaural beats are happening in your wave generators at the speed of light rather than at the speed of sound. And that's why the ecstasy is more intense. And Monroe uses the binaural beat through sound to stimulate an out-of-body experience, which I tried. It didn't work for me. But I have had many out-of-body experiences and mystical experiences, but it didn't work for me. But that is how it works. Yeah.
Well, I wonder if they
Differentials.
would think about having those differentials be with your ratios.
You
the
could
ratios you're getting.
calculate them to some of the ratios that I have, not the Fibonacci.
Right.
The Fibonacci is already well known, and a lot of experiments have been done on it. But the 1.111 is the 1111. How many people see 1111 everywhere?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's because you're tuning into the mother code of the universe. That's what I believe. And of course, there's more to it than that. But that's a brilliant observation.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
David, during the millennial celebrations with all the great statesmen there, a great fog came up at the time when they were supposed to have put a gold capstone back on.
The pyramid, yeah.
What is your take in the fact that they did not do that?
Well, I don't think they really understood what it would do. I think they thought maybe it would be some kind of symbolic kind of message that we were sending to the ETs. But it's interesting that you say that, because just in the last couple of months, how many people have seen the pyramid-shaped UFOs flying around in Russia? And I believe Jaime just may have shown one. And one of the ones that I saw in Russia was, I noticed the edges were not wobbling. They were lock solid. That means there's no way you can get an angular piece of geometry as a balloon and the wind's not going to do a little bit of this to it. It was lock solid. And
Interesting take on that was the Stargate ET craft that was in fact just totally a pyramid that sat down on top of it.
And I think that is the message. We need to put the gold capstones back on and do the experiments that Mark has inspired me to do.
Hi, David. Thanks for sharing, friend.
You got to get a little closer to the mic
Yeah,
there.
thanks for sharing, friend. I just want to make an observation. I saw someone who made an observation that the pyramids were in the direct center of the landmass. I find that pertinent to your findings. But also, I heard on Coast to Coast a couple of nights ago, a guy by the name of Glenn Kimmel mentioned that there's copper in the pyramids. And how might that relate in making the pyramids a communication device?
They become ultra supercapacitors as soon as you put the copper with the stone. The copper on alone is
so
not
it would just
capacitor.
amplify, is that correct?
It's magic what happens.
Yeah.
And you can,
and also, you may or may not know that the Nazis were very attuned with mercury, and they took a lot of it down to South America, I understand. And that's using the toroidal...
well, that's what I think these two little round balls are.
In the plasma of the craft.
Right, these two round balls here, they're not, I'm not on the screen anymore. I think those are where, you know, again, different materials going into the opposing magnetic field drive will produce different effects. And mercury needs to be tested, and so do a lot of different materials. So it's not just about the opposing magnetic fields. There's another level.
What part do you think mercury then would play?
Well, we have a lot of evidence because people have seen, you know, from what Bob Lazar has told us about the power of mercury. But element 115, the mathematical formula he gave us before at Lawrence Berkeley National Lab, they finally produced 115, element 115, and the math formula was almost identical to Lazar's.
Yeah.
But his formula predated theirs.
Are you aware of the fellow from Denver that was supplied as a medium the formula for 115? Are you aware of that?
No.
Stan Romanek.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, he's been supplied that formula.
That formula as
okay,
well.
I'll shut up. Thanks. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I know how. It is the belief that a lot of people that are metaphysical, that we're going into a new way of thinking. And that new way of thinking is about sharing, and it's about cooperativeness versus competitiveness. And a lot of the people that are trying to create this zero-point energy machines, they just want to find some way of making money on it, or they want to make sure that the whole public gets it, but you know, some company somewhere is going to make money on it. I think we need to go to the next level of thinking and not only share the technology, but just share the idea instead of trying to prioritize it and patent it and keep it to ourselves and have somebody making money on it.
That's why I've given my blueprints to the whole world here today, because, you know, I've never gotten money. Like Nassim Harriman spent $2 million in his lab and he produced nothing but bending metal. And his scientists came to me and told me what they did in the lab, and I said, you know, is that all he did with $2 million? Because that's nothing. And so, you know, I mean, look at the economy. Look at the Federal Reserve and the bankers. It's a very, very simple thing to say. I mean, we are richer than we've ever been in the history of the world. We have more goods, services, and labor, and thinking, and knowledge, and inventions than at any time in history. A dollar is supposed to represent goods, services, labor, education, health care, all those things, agriculture. So you should have the dollars for all of the goods and services and potential labor in the country. So there's no shortage of wealth. There's a shortage of dollars to move things. Unemployed, Obama says, well, we can't afford to go to the moon, but we have the steel, we have the unemployed workers to go there. And we either have to get beyond money or we have to get beyond central bankers.
Yes.
Hi, I have a share and a question. The share is, I did a continued fraction of your 10/9, and it's at 1111 crops up. I'll hand you the paper.
Right, the 1.111, which is what we talked about.
Yeah.
And it's interesting, on 2012, it's you know, central planet time. On the actual moment that we come into the date, the supposed end date, it will be 1111 standard time, which is really, really amazing.
Yeah. My question is, presentations have made the claim that there's a lot of underground economy money and rogue corporations that are doing this type of research. So even if more governmental sponsored research is running up against the buddy system, what's the possibility that there are rogue operations that are just moving ahead with the technology?
Well, that's exactly right. Like, I mean, I'll give you a story. I mean, John Searle, how many people saw the John Searle film? He got an offer in Thailand, and Thailand has relationships with China. No one would give him a measly $2 million. Even at the end of the film, you see the NASA scientist, and no, we don't have $2 million. Oh, that's so much money. And he might be trying to trick us. You know, if I was the appropriator of science and technology funding in Congress, I would give every guy and woman with an idea all the money they needed, because only one of them has to be right. There was only one Thomas Edison who invented the light bulb. There was only one Nikola Tesla who changed the entire world. So they don't all have to be right. You need to hedge. And our problem is we're so cheap. You know, I hate to say it, but even Bob Bigelow wouldn't give John Searle $2 million to find out if he's telling the truth. I believe he's telling the truth. It all makes perfect sense to me. We don't have $2 million, and the experiment that I want to do is in the hundreds of thousands of dollar range. Nothing. Peanuts. I mean, we're not really passionate. That's the problem. And rogue countries are willing to fund this stuff. And that's our mistake. We are asleep at the wheel. Every great invention in the history of the world, you can go to the airplane, the automobile, the computer, the electron microscope, all of them happen in this country first. But now, because corporations rule, and there's a lack of incentive and a lack of spirit in our investment communities, there's no passion to look at the UFO reverse engineer technology and see what we can gain from it. And that's why a lot of inventors go rogue. They go, and when you say rogue, I don't know if you mean, foreign countries or even, criminal levels or black ops, or if you just simply mean,
Be anything from rogue corporations to rogue nations.
Right. Okay. It's a very good point. We will lose if we don't fund this technology.
Hi. I was interested in hearing a little bit more about the black triangles that you said you got confirmation about, I guess, through Lockheed maybe, or? Yeah,
I mean, let's go back to the Phoenix lights. I mean, the eyewitnesses, it said it wasn't a formation. They saw it black out the sky. But the first witnesses were in northern Arizona. And last year I showed videotape of Boyd Bushman, who's been at Lockheed for 20 years. You can search his name on the U.S. Patent Office and see all these Lockheed patents. He's not lying. He said they moved a big part of Area 51 to Tooele, Utah. And Tooele, Utah is just north of where the first sightings of the black triangle that was over Phoenix appeared. And it stops right over Goodyear, Arizona, and Lockheed Martin is right down there. I mean, it's hard for us to imagine that we have craft that big. But if you understand how anti-gravity works, it makes perfect sense that we could have a craft any size. And Lockheed builds black triangles, the B-1, the F-117, the B-2 bomber. They're all black triangles, and that was a black triangle. I know it's hard to believe. It's just that we can't imagine, where would they park the thing, right? Tooele, Utah. It's a big open desert out there, and I don't think the Mormons really care about scrapping around the desert like people do in Nevada. So,
are you familiar with the famous wood carving that was done in 1566 regarding the event in 1561, 5 years earlier, over Nuremberg, Germany?
No, I haven't seen that wooden carving, but I have seen the carvings from South America in Peru that look like the space shuttle, and I've seen things like that.
The one in 1566 in Nuremberg, Germany, it shows a city at the bottom, and it's an event in the sky, and it has those tubular, I guess, tube-like, cigar-like looking UFOs. Jaime showed video earlier of orbs coming out of them. It shows tubes with orbs inside them and even orbs coming out of them, multiple different ones.
Right, I've seen that video.
Yeah, it's a picture. Apparently, what happened, more or less, the long story short, is that I guess white orbs were fighting black orbs, and they had some kind of battle, and it was real crazy. And then at the end of it, a huge black spear, triangle-shaped spear, flew over real slow and silent, and that was the story. The whole thing takes place in one picture that this guy carved on wood, so it's kind of a busy picture, but it was an event that took place over Nuremberg, 500 years ago.
Wow.
And I was wondering, or I always kind of thought that black spear thing that was described in that wood carving, maybe that's the same kind of thing that flew over Phoenix, but you're saying that maybe a mile-wide craft is possible. So we may...
Yeah, I don't have confirmation that the Phoenix Lights was Lockheed. I suspect that. Right. But I know for just pure logic, understanding this beam weapon and how powerful it is, and how it's more classified than the atomic bomb. Nobody will ever know how the thing works, even though it's incredibly simple, apparently. Atomic bomb is very, very simple, too. It's just hard to get the plutonium. But there's no doubt that there is a Star Wars going on. And I've heard stories just like you said, white craft and black craft fighting, and even beings fighting. I know my wife's cousin, he's in high school right now, and he's training to be a fighter pilot. He wants to be a fighter pilot in the future. He saw a UFO in the sky. He's seen them several times, and he saw this black kind of, the flying men from Mexico? He saw one of those, and then this white being came upon it and just destroyed it and dissolved it into nothing. And he saw this on the roof of somebody's house in California. There's there's no doubt the more you look at, even the Space Shuttle Columbia incident, which I've shown before, the photographs that show the beam weapon coming in and making a sharp right angle turn and striking the Columbia, there is a Star Wars going on. And I have theories about it. I mean, maybe ETs are fighting over who gets Earth next. It's pretty obvious we're going to destroy the place. You know, we don't respect our environment. There's trash all over the lawn outside of the casino, and there's trash in the rivers. People don't really care about the environment that much. Not the majority. It's the minority who really care. And they're probably thinking, these humans are going to blow themselves up and have a war, and who gets Earth next? And then so one ET race calls dibs, and the other one shows up later and says, no, it's mine, and then they start shooting each other. That's just a wacky theory that I have. I don't know. All right, thank you very much,
Thanks, guys.
everybody.